If you desire miracles against evil and the devil, turn to Saint Anthony and you will never fail. Here in the Church of Saint Anthony in Lisbon, in the crypt, there is a bone authenticated by a papal bull. The house of Saint Anthony was here where the altar is today. And it's interesting to see that the image of Saint Anthony was placed up there, and he is holding the child Jesus in his hands. It's very symbolic. Of course, Saint Anthony lived much later. He could never have carried the child Jesus. But it's an important symbol. A saint who was so important in preaching, so important for his sermons, directly associated with the image of Jesus. I also want to show you something over here. There is an image here that is considered miraculous, a portrait of Saint Anthony. People come here to leave little notes with requests and also to give thanks. This is a church full of symbolism. To find the love of your life, get married and never part, experience a great love, die of love. This has been or will be a dream for many people. Vinicius de Moraes wrote songs to win over his great loves. But in Brazilian popular tradition, the shortest path has been making a vow to a certain matchmaking saint who, along with Saint Peter and Saint John, is honored every year during the June festivals. You know who it is? I'm in his homeland. It's Saint Anthony. The most popular saint in Portugal, loved throughout the country and all over the world. Well, he's one of the patron saints of this beautiful capital. Yes, the patron saint of the Diocese of Lisbon is Saint Vincent, but Saint Anthony received the title of main patron saint of the city. They wouldn't leave him out, right? Here, girls looking for a good guy to marry have the custom of turning a statue of Saint Anthony upside down, hoping to find their soulmate. In Brazil, as we know, where Saint Anthony is also highly venerated, right? We know about it. There are many different kinds of folk charms to help someone get married. There's the woman who sticks a red ribbon to her bra for 7 days. There are those who stick a knife with the suitor's name into the trunk of a banana tree. And there's another method, which is to put 7 roses on an altar for the matchmaking saint. It's true. In Brazil, there's also the tradition of turning a statue of Saint Anthony upside down in a glass of water. Some people prefer to do this in a glass of cachaça, go figure. Everyone has their own tradition. Yeah, according to the most devoted followers, there are many ways to obtain a favor from Saint Anthony of Lisbon. And I want to invite you to learn about the story and the stories of this saint who preached against arranged marriages. Those that happened and still happen purely out of convenience. He wanted to defend true love. Yeah. Saint Anthony defended marriage for love. Yeah, but after everything I said, someone must be wondering, is this Saint Anthony of Lisbon the same one from Padua? Rodrigo Alvarez, are you talking about the same Saint Anthony? Everyone says that Saint Anthony is from Padua in Italy. Now you're saying he's from Lisbon? So are there 2 saints then? Or a saint with 2 different cities? Calm down, you're the one asking these questions. There's only one Saint Anthony, it's the same one. The exact same miracles are attributed to him, and the exact same rituals are performed for him. The explanation for this, let's say, dual citizenship has to do with the fact that Saint Anthony became really well known for everything he did while he was in the Italian city of Padua after joining the Franciscan order. But the boy Fernando de Bulhões, born here in Portugal, only later called Anthony, was born right here. Did I say Portugal? No. It's on this very street, in a house that used to be right behind here, next to the Sé, the Lisbon Cathedral, and right up against the walls of the medieval city that existed here when he was born.
Do you know how long ago that was?
Almost 1,000 years.
From now on, we're going to walk these streets and learn more about the history of the man who is considered the most international saint there is. The saint of the whole world, as Pope Leo XIII once described him. Who was a contemporary and friend of another very popular saint, Saint Francis of Assisi. And even though he died young, he performed dozens of healings that were considered miracles. He fought against arranged marriages in wealthy families and had the fastest canonization in the history of Christianity. Yes, even faster than the French King Louis IX, who impressed everyone with how quickly it happened.
His baptismal name was not Anthony, but Fernando de Bullois, the son of a wealthy and noble family. And he was educated to become a knight. A knight, the kind who rides horses, because we're talking about the Middle Ages, right in the time of the Crusades here in Portugal. When Christian expeditions from different parts of Europe and various kingdoms began, seeking to take back Jerusalem from the Muslims. Jerusalem and other sacred parts of the Holy Land. The exact year when the future Saint Anthony was born is uncertain. It could have been either in 1191 or in 1195. No one knows what happened to the baptism record. There is no birth certificate, but it is said that Antonio's father was a descendant of Godfrey of Bouillon, the commander of the First Portuguese Crusade. You heard right, the saint was a descendant of the warrior. But after all, they understood it was a holy war to reclaim the holy places. But I'm going to show you why St. Anthony didn't want to ride a horse and preferred to live out Christianity without a sword, using only words as his weapon. The house where he was born, still called Fernando de Bullois, the house where St. Anthony spent his childhood. It was exactly right here on this street, Rua das Pedras Negras, which is next to the Cathedral of Santa Maria Maior, a building that already existed at that time, although not in the form we see today. The cathedral, which is the Lisbon Cathedral, began to be built 50 years before St. Anthony was born and was still under construction at the time of his death.
We're talking about something that happened so long ago that it's hard to imagine what it would be like to see the young Fernando de Bullois attending Mass in a city that ended right here. And every great city in medieval times was surrounded by walls. Each entrance had a name. Here, for example, was the Sea Gate, which no longer exists. In recent decades, with the advancement of forensic technologies, researchers from all over the world have been trying to reconstruct the image of saints and historical figures who lived long before the invention of photography. The incredible three-dimensional reconstruction work of the face and body of the crucified Jesus is an example. Thanks to efforts like this, we have a reconstruction of the face of Saint Anthony. The Brazilian specialist Cicero Moraes created this image in 2014 based on X-rays of the Portuguese saint's skull.
When St. Anthony was born, Lisbon had undergone enormous transformations. The Arab conquest, which had begun in the year 711 in just 3 years, left the entire Iberian Peninsula in the hands of the Islamic invaders. Well, that period was coming to an end. The Christian troops of Dom Afonso Henriques, who would become the first king of Portugal, had managed to expel the Moors from Lisbon. That's what the invaders were called, the Moors. This was in 1147. The Moors defended themselves here in this historic place in Lisbon, São Jorge Castle, which is right behind me, a fortress that began to be built in the 4th century. Knights of Dom Afonso Henriques, with the help of Norman, German, English, and Flemish crusaders, emerged victorious. It was one of the first, maybe the very first holy war, a term that has been used and abused throughout history. By around 1250, the Arab invaders had already lost control over almost the entire peninsula except for Granada in Spain, where they held out for another 2 centuries. But the Arabs left many marks. First, of course, in the makeup of the population, and also in customs, in the arts. And this changed forever the history of the Iberian Peninsula, Portugal, and Spain, but particularly here in Lisbon, with buildings in Moorish and Arabesque styles that decorate every corner of the city. Right here, just below the castle, near the Tagus River, where there used to be a large mosque, the victorious Portuguese decided to build a great church to mark the
return of Christian rule.
This great church is the Cathedral of Santa Maria Maior, the seat of the Patriarchate of Lisbon, also known as the Lisbon Cathedral.
It's a church that blends different architectural styles because it underwent many modifications over the centuries, especially after the great earthquake that shook Lisbon in the 18th century. The initial style was Romanesque, but later the Gothic style predominated, which we can still see today.
It was here at the Lisbon Cathedral that Fernando de Bulhões began his religious studies in the order of St. Augustine. Still a teenager, he went to live in the monastery of São Vicente de Fora, also here in the city. The monastery's library was extremely rich, and this sparked the curiosity of young Fernando, who from an early age questioned moral mediocrity, superficiality, and what he called the corruption of society. Later, he went to the monastery of Santa Cruz,
Coimbra.
I'll show you soon that he changed his name there.
And it was there that he came into contact for the first time with the first Franciscan missionaries who had arrived in Portugal in 1217 and were on their way to Morocco to evangelize the Moors, and probably to get back at them for centuries of Arab occupation. Fernando de Bulhões decided to join the Franciscans, and off he went to Morocco. But when he arrived in Africa, he became very ill and had to return. On the way back, a storm dragged the boat to the coast of Sicily, where he ended up staying for a few years until he decided to move to the mainland. Then came the meeting that changed his life. He went to Assisi in northern Italy, where he met the future Saint Francis of Assisi and his first followers. To complete his training, Fernando de Bulhões was ordered to isolate himself for 15 months. In a hermitage, the place where hermits lived. There he joined an ascetic, a person who lived in the simplest way possible, someone who gave up all wealth to devote himself to study and meditation. It was at this point in the story that he adopted the name Antonio in honor of the hermit Saint Anthony. He was approved by Saint Francis himself and impressed his fellow friars with his simplicity. It wasn't just for his simplicity, but the future Saint Antonio caught everyone's attention for his immense knowledge. One day, at the request of the Bishop of Bologna, he gave an unexpected speech. He spoke in Latin and in such an impressive way that, from then on, he never stopped preaching. He was called to travel throughout Italy, visiting orders founded by his friend and mentor Saint Francis of Assisi.
Only after the death of St. Francis did St. Anthony come to live here in Padua, in northern Italy, the city that would forever become his surname. His sermons here became very famous and attracted crowds. There were more than 30,000 people here to listen to his sermons, which were even compiled and are considered today as great literary works, called the Antonian Sermons. Always concerned about the insensitivity of the wealthy class he encountered both in Portugal and here in Italy, St. Anthony would say to the crowds that there is one body and one spirit. But the man with dropsy, that is, the lustful and greedy person, does not preserve this unity, stains the body, and suffocates the spirit with the thorns of greed. If he were bound by the bond of peace and the cord of unity, he would never have fallen into the well, but by growing in both things, he dies in the well of despair. Where does this matchmaker reputation come from? St. Anthony was a strong opponent of arranged marriages, those arranged purely for financial gain. And he even talked about a tendency to commercialize marriage. St. Anthony advocated marriage based on true love. It's also recorded in his biography or hagiography, which is the biography of a saint, that St. Anthony used donations that were meant for the church to help a young woman who needed a dowry to get married, Fact or legend? Nobody knows, but it's a great story, isn't it? Another tradition associated with St. Anthony is the festival in June. This one appeared here in Europe in the 14th century and was taken to Brazil by the Portuguese, where it merged with indigenous and Afro-Brazilian traditions. Then, together with the other two saints, the Festas Juninas emerged. St. Anthony died on June 13, 1231 in Arcella, which is nearby, close to Padua. At dawn, he fainted, and feeling that death was near, he asked to be brought here to the small church of Santa Maria Mater Domini, where he had lived for many years. He was already feeling very weak. He couldn't handle the journey in the ox cart and didn't make it back alive to this city, which would forever be linked to his story and to his identity. But St. Anthony's last wish was granted, and he was buried here in the church. The following year, the city decided to build a basilica, and the small church was incorporated into the project. And it's been almost 900 years since then. The Basilica of St. Anthony still stands here in Padua, where it attracts worshippers and tourists from all over the world, especially from Portugal and Brazil. 40 years after his death, they opened the coffin and discovered that St. Anthony's tongue had become mummified. Isn't that symbolic? The instrument he used most in his sermons and preaching was preserved. Was it a miracle? Coincidence? St. Anthony's tongue is kept in a reliquary here inside the basilica. St. Bonaventure, who was present at the time of the exhumation, said that the incorrupt tongue was proof that St. Anthony's preaching was inspired by God. Besides being a great orator, St. Anthony was also a miracle worker. 53 miracles were attributed to him. It's no coincidence he had the fastest canonization in the history of Christianity, being made a saint just 11 months after his death. Well, after that, with the large influx of pilgrims who came here to Padua to ask for blessings, the bishop of the city decided to write to Pope Gregory to start the canonization process. All the canonical requirements were quickly fulfilled, and on May 30, 1232, he was canonized. Do you know how long after his death? Less than a year. Many of St. Anthony's miracles are related to health problems, and it's impressive. St. Anthony is said to have resurrected a girl who had died by drowning. Because of all this, more than just the matchmaker saint, he became the saint of all miracles, as the responsory of St. Anthony says.
Music.
Here behind me you can see the body of a Christian martyr that came from the cemetery in Rome. It was sent here in 1777 by Pope Pius VI. This is the martyr Saint Justina. We know that at the beginning of Christianity the religion was persecuted. Before it was accepted by Emperor Constantine around the year 311 with the Edict of Milan, and then in 312. Little by little the religion started to be accepted. Before that, many Christians died in Rome and were buried there. Well, this mummified body brought here would be that of Saint Justina, one of those many Christian martyrs who died defending the Christian religion at a time when Rome was pagan, when the emperor himself was even considered a god. Music. St. Anthony died on June 13th, which is why his day is celebrated on that date. Thank you. Here in Portugal, the people from Lisbon, right, who are also known as alfacinhas, that's what they call themselves, they like to eat sardines in honor of the saint who preached a simple life. Sardines are a simple food and they eat them seasoned, including basil. For example, there are 4 sardines on the plate. Music accompanied by a simple salad and boiled potatoes. They also eat it accompanied by caldo verde that St. Anthony used to distribute to the poor. It's traditional to eat sardines with bread and accompany them with wine. Music. After all, wine is associated with the sacred throughout history, music both in Christianity and in Judaism. Remember when I said at the beginning that Saint Anthony is the patron saint of Portugal? But he's not the only one. He's the patron saint of the capital, right? Of the city. And before anyone watching here, any Portuguese person says we're wrong, let me explain. Saint Vincent of Saragossa, interestingly a Spanish saint, is the patron saint of the Patriarchate of Lisbon. Saint Anthony, on the other hand, is the patron saint of the city of Lisbon and is considered the city's principal patron saint. That's what the liturgical directory of his church says. Everyone loves Saint Anthony, not just here in Portugal, but also in Brazil. In 1995, a Catholic institution conducted a survey to find out which saint was most loved by Brazilians. Do you already know what the result was? Well, in first place was Saint Anthony with 20% support. I'll invite you to join me here. And we'll eat St. Anthony's sardines here together next to the cathedral here in Portugal downtown, very close to where he used to live. A very simple and very typical Portuguese dish. It's interesting, isn't it, that the saint's simplicity is even reflected in what he eats. Music. Music holiness is in what he ate. The idea that you should eat simply, live simply, knowing that he came from a wealthy family here in Portugal. He didn't want any of that. He didn't want to go to war. He didn't want to go on a crusade. The crusade, let's put it that way, of St. Anthony was through words, speaking to people, preaching sermons. Then he went to Padua. We showed that, right? And there he gave very important sermons. He met St. Francis of Assisi in Italy. It's a very beautiful story that brings many people here to Portugal. Look, if you come, I recommend you sit here next to the cathedral. I have this beautiful view of the cathedral here. You order a sardine. I hope you like it. Order wine too, simple Portuguese wine. It doesn't have to be expensive. In Portugal, even inexpensive wine is very good. This one is theirs.